found footage, the pretense of honest documentation. The attempt to pass off a constructed narrative as uncontestable facts. The entire premise is flawed. Right off the bat, most found footage films are horror movies that show distressing things happening to supposedly real people. If any distribution company attempted to pull that off, if they attempted to monetize actual footage of people being hurt or killed in gruesome ways, especially if it was done today, maybe it could be passed off it was stock footage or something, or it was too old, or whatever. People would not like that. They would be sued, they would have lawsuits, they would... a whole bunch of stuff would happen, and no company would be willing to deal with that. I mean, we just have Cannibal Holocaust as an example of that happening. People would be pissed off. Not to mention if... on the other hand, if they genuinely try to pass off constructed footage as a genuine, they'd be perpetrating false statements of facts. Again, Cannibal Holocaust. Even besides that, from the moment we're born, we're saturated with TV shows and movies. And even when we can't express what we're picking up on, we are generally able to tell when we are being presented with a narrative. We can tell when something is faked. This isn't really an issue with the genre, I think. It's a breakdown in a social contract. Demanding found footage to stand up under scrutiny means you need to be able to verify every aspect of it. If it's a production, you can't do that. But conversely, demanding the footage to stand up under scrutiny as a measure of its quality implies that you really want the footage to be real, and if it's a horror movie, that is disturbing, if you don't mind me saying so. Which, it doesn't mean the directors shouldn't make the effort to make the footage appear real, or that the credibility of the footage counts for nothing, but it's an interesting variable for how one determines the quality of a found footage movie. How does one do that? What makes for a good found footage film? Well, let's talk about that today. And hello newcomers and old, I am Core Scratches, and this week we will take a look at what makes a good found footage movie. Alternative facts, the charm of found footage movies. We live in scary times, so far as objective reality is concerned. More and more it's starting to occur to people we don't share the same perception of truth, and we live in an age of information overflow where we can literally decide what to believe first and then find the facts that support it. And we can find those facts no matter what our opinions are. And that brings on the question, how many of your deep-set opinions stem from your Facebook feed? How many uncontestable facts do you know of that a simple Google search can disprove? And on that note, in a society where the information is controlled by major corporations with profits to gain, how willing are you to trust those search results? And what does any of this pseudo-profound bullshit have to do with found footage movies? I'll tell you. The popularity of found footage films can only be explained so far by saying it's all due to one-hit wonders like Paranormal Activity or The Blair Witch Project. Or that it's cheap or excuses weaknesses in the movie. It doesn't, but more on that later. The simple explanation for why found footage movies has grown to what it is today is people watch found footage movies. And I believe it's because the genre works with the same campsite story principle that another popular horror media is built around. The Creepypasta forum. By presenting the events of the movie as real, it allows us even closer to the horrific events. It allows us even closer to the strange and macabre than many other major horror movies allows us. That sounds good, but it also means it's much more difficult to make it convincing. For some people, the very idea of a fantastic story being real is enough to break their suspension of disbelief. And I want to be clear on this. The things people are willing to accept as plausible in cinema, it varies between the individuals. But it's nevertheless important for the directors of found footage movies to attempt to make their movies as convincing as possible, convincing not being the same thing as believable. The way an audience is convinced to accept fantastic movies varies between movies, and the same principle won't always apply. But there are a few guidelines that I believe should always be considered when making a found footage movie, or when reviewing one. Why the camera? People filming and photographing everything feels common and beyond the need for an explanation today. For every news report about a tragedy, there are 10 amateur clips from cell phones to the one news camera. So you'd imagine the motivation for why one character has a camera shoved in everyone's faces in the middle of a horrific event is the least important part of a found footage film. Wrong. Not so. First of all, an iPhone and a bespoke handheld camera is not the same thing. Depending on quality, they can be used the same way, and there are a few found footage films that are made using iPhone cameras, and the quality of an iPhone camera, it's nothing to sneeze at, absolutely not. But a handheld camera is specifically made to capture video. It's made to make it as easy as possible to do that specific thing. And if you use a video camera to capture video instead of a phone camera, there's usually a reason for it. It's not just something you have on you, is what I'm saying. Another aspect to consider is how people tend to act when making a video. Recording a video is done from a distance, psychologically speaking. When recording a video, you're framing an event you're witnessing, but you're not actually part of the event unless you deliberately make yourself a part of it, like a selfie video or something. I have no idea what I was doing there. Recording a video on a phone tends to be a spur-of-the-moment thing done in safety, for lack of a better word. If you're making a horror movie, that goes out the window. With that said, recording a video can be done as a distancing act as well. Going back to what I said about tragedies in the news, those videos tend to either be filmed by people not immediately involved in the events, the way you would when writing your thoughts down so you can surveil them with a clear head later. On rare occasions, we do get videos from the middle of the events, but it's rare, and usually it's down to the quirks of the person holding the camera. Or it's a distressing attempt to bring attention to the things that are happening by actually showing the things that are happening by posting the video online. If you don't give a decent motivation for why the character with the camera has a camera, and keeps it rolling no matter what is going on, that's a mark against the movie. For example, I can't remember what movie it was now, just because I brought it up. It was one of the Bigfoot found footage movies. There are surprisingly many Bigfoot found footage movies. I think it was either Exists or Evidence, but I'm not sure. Anyway, the character with the camera there, it was explained by the other characters. He had a tendency to distance himself from distressing events, and that made his habit of keeping the camera rolling more believable. Another movie that I can't remember the name of either. I'm a professional, I swear. It featured a group of friends. I think it was 2 girls and 2 boys. The younger of the girls was obsessed with social media and filmed and posted everything they got up to, including losing her virginity to one of the boys. That's clever a thing to post online. But yeah, I can believe a character like that exists, and I can believe a character like that would be motivated to always have the camera rolling no matter what. And the whole movie, it was assembled from the clips that she uploaded while they were in the woods. Alternatively, there doesn't have to be a character involved at all. For example, in Paranormal Activity 2, I think most, if not all, of that movie was assembled from security camera footage from inside the house and around the house. Which, I don't know, am I the only one who finds that strange? Why would you put security cameras inside your private home? Am I the only one who finds that strange? But, anyway. There may also be practical reasons for why they won't put down the camera. In Butterfly Kisses, they used the camera to capture the evidence of a local legend for a very long while. For a very long while, it only appeared inside the camera. That's why they kept the camera rolling. Before it started appearing for them in real life, and that's where they tried to get footage of it. They tried to get evidence for it, or whatever. I can't remember. Were they trying to keep it at bay? It was something along those lines. In The Tunnel, they used their camera's night vision mode to see in the darkness. Although it wasn't really necessary for them to keep filming just to do that. They could have just held up the camera and used the night vision mode, and they didn't have to record, but at the same time, why not? I remember the character holding the camera at one point in the movie, the woman. Her character and personality, it was very well established. She was desperate in some way. I can't remember what way, but she was desperate in some sense, and she needed good footage for the thing that she was doing, and so it made sense for her to keep the camera rolling despite the circumstances, or maybe because of them. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit sick. So yes, a person, or at the very least, understandable circumstances for why the characters for why the character with the camera keeps the camera rolling no matter what. That is important for a found footage film. Second thing, presentation. It's fair to say a lot of found footage films, they have the same presentation. It starts with what's usually a dark background with a text overlay, explaining the background of the footage and the circumstances in which it was made, before immediately cutting to the first video clip. The disclaimer opening, as I call it. It's a creatively lazy way of doing it. But it doesn't necessarily say anything about the quality of the rest of the film, unless it sets up something that the film later violates. If it doesn't do that, it serves its purpose, and it doesn't seem out of place, but it's not the most interesting way of starting the film. The thing is, if you make an opening that is too cinematic, that will probably take the audience out of the experience. If you make an opening that is too artistic, it will take away from the impression of a real documentation, is what I'm saying, and will instead illustrate the movie is fictitious. A good example of this is As Above, So Below. That wasn't awkward at all. The movie starts out with a very cinematic opening where the title appears gradually as a form of, in the form of a triangle, in the form of a pyramid, maybe. And it ends with a credit sequence that is a bunch of photo bashes of Paris and the catacombs, and that there are mystic symbols appearing and disappearing. It makes it very clear this movie was very specifically made to. Yeah, it made it clear this movie was manufactured, that none of it was real. Come to think of it, I think all of As Above, So Below as a whole was too cinematic just in general, but that's for a different review. I'm not saying it should be the disclaimer opening or anything. There are more interesting ways of presenting a found footage film. You could, for example, make a mockumentary-style presentation the way they did in The Tunnel or Classroom 6. What both of these movies did was have the footage be discovered, examined, and then commented on by experts and people affected by it. They were presented as proper made-for-TV documentaries in that sense, and that worked because not only was it more interesting than a disclaimer opening, but re-edits and interviews spliced in with the found footage allowed the movie to have a good pacing without feeling manufactured, without it feeling unnatural. The most important thing with a good presentation is for it to set up the movie in an interesting way, without it coming across the footage is less than real. And if a movie pulls that off, it's a good sign right there. You will pay for effects. A found footage film doesn't have to be cheap. It doesn't have to be a cheap first attempt at making film by burgeoning filmmakers. If you have a decent-sized budget and you are an experienced director, it can be made. You can make a found footage movie. But that's not usually the way found footage movies are made. And it can show when a director bites off more than they can chew, especially when it comes to special effects. Practical effects, especially in creature features, have stuck around for longer than a lot of people realize since the introduction of computer animation. Both techniques have their time and place, but since found footage films usually are made by people without a lot of capital or contacts within the industry, the impression of an inhuman threat is usually created with practical effects. Cheap practical effects. And the way they come across, it comes down to your skill as a director. This is usually covered up by the way the camera is used, which is why shaky cam is a hallmark of found footage. Convincing special effects, they are convincing special effects are difficult to achieve in the best of circumstances, but I dare say it's even more so when the whole premise of a movie is its documentation of reality. The practice surrounding special effects in found footage films is pretty much the same as in any other movie, really, but with higher stakes, and the audience generally isn't as forgiving about mistakes and failings in that department, even if the story of the movie is good. Some of the best use of special effects I've seen in found footage comes from the 2013 movie Where. Or is it Where? No, it's Where. I'm sorry, it's spelled W-E-R. I'm really not sure how to pronounce that, even though it's English. Where is about a French man who's suspected to have killed a family with his bare hands, only for it to turn out he's a werewolf. The practical effects are subtle enough to be believable, and the effects added in post-production are used to enhance the actor's inhuman qualities. It wouldn't convince a jury of film experts or even a well-versed audience, but they look good and it makes the man appear truly bestial. An example of poor use of special effects, of practical effects in found footage films would be The Eyes in the Dark. Oh. I can understand the thought behind using puppets and suits in a creature feature. I believe found footage has a lot to learn from the creature feature workshops of the 70s and 80s, with their use of practical effects and how to achieve greatness cheaply. I mean, it's not House of the Dead, what is it? Necronomicon? No, the Necronomicon was a book in the movie. Diary of the Dead, House of the Dead. I swear to God, I know what I'm talking about. But in that movie, that one, you know the one I'm talking about, that movie, the one with Ash. All of those effects were done by the director. I think all of those effects were done by the director, I should say, and they were all done very cheaply using common household items. That is impressive considering what was done with it. And found footage movies, because the way the cameras are used, they allow for a lot more use of puppets and suits and so on that can make the monster, I should say, look very real and very authentic, despite how cheap it possibly was to make. But when the cameras are kept still on the puppets, and no effort goes into the puppeteering, it becomes painfully clear they are just puppets and people in masks. And in The Eyes in the Dark, I think it was just puppets. I think it was just plushies, if I'm honest. So yes, there isn't any practical difference between how special effects are used in traditional cinema and how they should be used in found footage, but the nature of the medium makes it a much more risky endeavor and should only be done when absolutely certain it looks good. Plot! Or lack thereof. Again, not at all awkward. It may sound a bit strange to say a movie doesn't need a plot, but to an extent true. this is to an extent true of found footage films. Story and plots are sometimes used interchangeably, but there is a difference between them. The story is any series of events, while the plot is how the events are structured. You could say the plot is what makes a movie interesting. It's also what separates fiction from reality. Reality doesn't follow a three-act structure, and life isn't guided by a playwright's clever dramatic flair. It follows. A found footage film shouldn't have a plot either, if they're trying to portray reality. Of course, it's silly to expect a movie to be deliberately boring and undramatic, and most found footage movies do follow traditional plot structures, but the trick is to not make it apparent that they are. The events, twists, developments, and so on, they should all be integrated in such a way that, while they exist, they don't come across as part of a template or feel contrived. So, like any movie, I hear you say. But it's a bit difficult to explain what I mean without examples, so in The Bay, we don't follow one person or a group of friends documenting their attempt to escape the disaster area. Instead, the movie is a collage of videos made by different people who are all trapped in the event. This way, it allows the movie to have a dramatic structure without seeming contrived. That said, I feel the characters are a bit stereotyped, and the scene's not entirely original, but that's a different issue. By contrast, the tunnels do pretty much the exact opposite. Strong, believable characters that feel like they're reacting naturally to their situation, and maintain strong drives and motivation while displaying character. But hamstrung by the very obvious structure to the events, which is fine. The movie is presented as a documentary, so the structure makes more sense. If a found footage movie has no excuse for the pacing, if it's film that pretends to be assembled from clips taken from one camera, in the order that they came in, and they still follow a dramatic structure, that is when it feels the most fake to me. And there are so many movies that do this. I mean, there's Cloverfield, Crow's Nest, The Den, The Rake, Rash, what else? Hell House LLC, I think, also does that. It's a common mistake, is what I'm saying. And I know we have a flair for going on and on for a long while, but that's pretty much it, I think. At least it's what I can think of off the top of my head, which is very difficult, as you may have noticed. Those are what I consider some of the essences to making and judging a found footage film. I hope you don't take my word as the gospel. These are just some observations that I've made as a fan of the genre. And as always, you should only judge a movie as a whole, not to mention on its own merits. Unless it happens to be Cannibal Holocaust, because fuck that movie. Anyway, I hope you all enjoyed listening to me. Hope I made sense, and the camera ran out of fucking space before I could finish. Oh, the irony. Anyway, I was just about to leave it half anyway. I have been Cold Scratches, and thank you for watching. If you liked this video, please, well, leave a like and a comment if you want to. And click the little subscription and click the little bell if you want to see more of me. And I hope you see me again next time. Bye for now.